Leela sat quietly at the kitchen table, her fingers tracing the intricate patterns of the lace tablecloth. The room, once a haven of warmth and love, now felt like a cold, lifeless shell. The air was thick with an uneasy silence, broken only by the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the corner. Across the table, her husband, Greg, stood with a rigid posture, his face twisted with a cold determination she had never seen before. "I've transferred the ownership of this house to my parents," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth or hesitation. "We're heading towards a divorce. There's no need for us to maintain a relationship anymore." Leela stared at him, stunned. The stream of accusations and insults that followed was relentless, each word a dagger aimed at her heart. Greg's parents, standing silently behind him, smiled approvingly, their eyes glinting with malice. The betrayal was complete and absolute. But Leela was not fazed. She had anticipated this moment and had a plan. She nodded calmly, her face betraying none of the turmoil inside. Rising from the table, she left the house with the luggage she had secretly prepared, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and excitement. Her name was Leela, and she had just turned 50. A long time had passed since their marriage, and their children had grown independent. She had found solace and purpose in teaching handmade accessories, a hobby turned career that brought her immense joy. It was the one aspect of her life Greg had not managed to taint. Greg's transformation from a loving partner to a tyrant had been gradual but undeniable. His demands became more unreasonable, his temper more volatile. He quit his job without explanation and lazed around the house, leaving a trail of destruction in his wake. The man she had once loved had become a stranger, a monster hiding behind a familiar face. Leela had quietly observed, planned and prepared for this moment. As she walked away from the house that had once been her sanctuary, she knew the real storm was yet to come. The rain began to pour as Leela drove through the deserted streets of their small town. She gripped the steering wheel tightly, her mind racing with the possibilities that lay ahead. She had a destination in mind, a place where she hoped to find the answers she desperately needed. Her car finally pulled up in front of a small, unassuming cottage on the outskirts of town. The sign by the gate read, "Marianne's Mystical Curiosities." It was a place she had visited once before, out of curiosity. The owner, Marianne, was rumored to have an uncanny ability to uncover secrets and reveal truths hidden from the naked eye. Leela stepped out of the car and walked up the path to the front door. She knocked hesitantly, unsure of what she would find. The door creaked open, and Marianne stood there, a knowing smile on her lips. "Leela, I've been expecting you," Marianne said softly, her voice like a gentle whisper in the storm. Inside, the cottage was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the world outside. Marianne led Leela to a cozy sitting room, where a fire crackled in the hearth. The room was filled with an eclectic mix of artifacts and curiosities, each with its own story to tell. "I know why you're here," Marianne said, her eyes piercing through Leela's facade. "You seek the truth about Greg and the darkness that surrounds him." Leela nodded, feeling a lump form in her throat. "Yes, I need to understand what happened to him, and why." Marianne motioned for Leela to sit. "The answers you seek are not easy to find. They are hidden deep within the shadows of his past, and unraveling them will require courage and resilience." Leela took a deep breath, her resolve firm. "I'm ready." Marianne's eyes softened with sympathy. "Very well, we shall begin." The session with Marianne was intense and draining. Through a combination of tarot readings, divination, and meditation, she began to peel back the layers of Greg's life. Dark secrets emerged, revealing a man tormented by his own demons, driven by greed and ambition. His descent into darkness was not sudden, but a slow, insidious process fueled by betrayal and deceit. One particular revelation hit Leela hard. Greg had been involved in shady dealings, a web of corruption that extended far beyond their small town. His parents were complicit, using their influence to shield him from the consequences of his actions. The house transfer was just the beginning of a larger plan to strip Lila of everything she held dear. As Marianne continued to uncover the truth, Lila's shock turned to anger. She realized that her battle was not just for her own freedom, but for justice. She could not let Greg and his parents get away with their crimes. The following morning, Lila returned to the house to collect the rest of her belongings. Greg was gone, likely confident that he had broken her spirit. She moved swiftly, her mind focused on the task ahead. While packing, she found an old journal hidden in Greg's study. It contained detailed accounts of his illicit activities, evidence that could bring him down. Lila's hands trembled as she read the entries, the magnitude of his betrayal overwhelming her. She knew she couldn't do this alone. With the journal in hand, she drove to the police station. Detective Jameson, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for solving even the most complex cases, listened intently as Lila recounted her story. "This is serious," Jameson said, his expression grim as he flipped through the journal. "We'll need to act quickly. Greg and his parents are dangerous, and they won't hesitate to silence you if they find out what you know." Lila nodded, her resolve unwavering. "I'm not afraid. I won't let them win." The days that followed were a whirlwind of investigations and confrontations. Detective Jameson and his team worked tirelessly to gather evidence and build a case against Greg and his parents. Lila found herself caught in a web of intrigue and danger, each day bringing new revelations and challenges. One evening, as she returned to her temporary apartment, she found a note slipped under her door. It was a warning, a thinly veiled threat meant to scare her into silence. But instead of fear, it fueled her determination. Lila sat across from Detective Jameson in his cluttered office, the tension in the room palpable. "They're onto us," Jameson said, his brow furrowed. "We need to move fast." Lila's eyes blazed with determination. "What's our next step?" Jameson leaned back in his chair, considering their options. "We need a confession. Something that ties them directly to the crimes." Lila thought for a moment. "What if I could get Greg to talk? He trusts me, or at least he thinks he can manipulate me." Jameson hesitated. "It's risky, but it might be our best shot. Can you do it?" Lila's jaw set in determination. "I have to, for my own sake and for justice." The plan was set in motion. Lila arranged a meeting with Greg, using the pretense of discussing their separation. The setting was a secluded cafe on the edge of town, a place where they could talk without arousing suspicion. Greg arrived, his expression smug and confident. He believed he had won, that Lila was there to beg for his mercy. But she had other plans. "I don't understand why you're doing this," Lila began, her voice trembling just enough to be convincing. "We could have worked things out." Greg scoffed. "You were always too naive, Lila. This was never about us. It was about power, control, something you could never understand." Lila's heart pounded as she pressed on. "But why? Why ruin everything we built together?" Greg leaned in, his eyes cold and calculating. "Because I could. Because I deserved more than this small-town life. And now I have everything I want." The words were all Lila needed. She knew Detective Jameson was recording their conversation from a nearby table, the evidence finally falling into place. Greg's arrogance was his downfall. He had underestimated Lila, not realizing that the woman he thought he had broken was stronger than ever. Lila found refuge in a small, cozy apartment on the other side of town. It was a far cry from the house she had painstakingly built, filled with memories of happier times. But it was hers, a sanctuary untouched by Greg's malevolence, and it was enough for now. The walls were adorned with her handmade accessories, each piece a testament to her resilience and creativity. The small space radiated warmth and comfort, a stark contrast to the cold, oppressive atmosphere she had left behind. She immersed herself in her work, finding solace in the creative process and the camaraderie with her students. Teaching classes on crafting jewelry and accessories allowed her to escape, even if just for a few hours, from the storm brewing in her personal life. The smiles and laughter of her students were balm to her wounded heart. Yet the betrayal gnawed at her. She couldn't shake off the feeling that there was more to Greg's actions than met the eye. One evening, as she sipped chamomile tea in her living room, her phone buzzed with a notification from the surveillance cameras she had secretly installed before leaving the house. Her heart raced as she opened the live feed. She'd hoped the cameras would provide peace of mind, but now, as she watched the grainy footage, she felt a new wave of dread. There was Greg, sitting with his parents in the living room that had once been her haven, discussing their plans for the house. The room was filled with an air of smug satisfaction. Greg's mother, a woman who had always looked down on Lila, spoke with a voice dripping with satisfaction. "It's perfect," she said, her tone maliciously gleeful. "We'll move in next week. Everything is falling into place." Lila's blood ran cold. She had suspected their intentions, but hearing it confirmed was a different matter. Her fingers tightened around the phone, her mind racing. She realized she needed to act quickly to protect herself and her future. Greg's betrayal was not just personal. It was a calculated move to strip her of everything she had worked for. Determined to uncover the full extent of Greg's schemes, Lila decided to visit her lawyer the next morning. She needed to understand her legal standing and find a way to fight back. As she prepared for bed, her thoughts churned with anxiety and determination. The law office of Eleanor Sharp was nestled in a quiet part of town, a small, unassuming building that belied the tenacity of its owner. Eleanor was a seasoned attorney known for her relentless pursuit of justice. Lila had met her through a mutual friend and had immediately felt a sense of trust and confidence in her. As Lila sat in Eleanor's office, surrounded by stacks of legal books and case files, she felt a glimmer of hope. Eleanor listened intently as Lila recounted the events of the past few weeks, her sharp eyes never missing a detail. "Greg has transferred the house to his parents," Lila explained, her voice trembling slightly. "And now they're planning to move in. I need to know what my options are." Eleanor leaned back in her chair, considering the situation. "This isn't just about the house, Lila. It's about control and manipulation. We need to look at the bigger picture. Do you have any documentation of Greg's actions?" Lila nodded, pulling out a folder from her bag. "I've kept records of his financial dealings and some suspicious transactions. I also have recordings from the surveillance cameras." Eleanor's eyes narrowed as she flipped through the documents. "This is a start. We'll need to dig deeper into Greg's finances and his connections. If he's involved in illegal activities, we can use that to our advantage." Lila felt a surge of determination. What do we do next? Eleanor smiled, a hint of steely resolve in her expression. "We fight back. I'll file for an injunction to prevent the transfer of the house, and we'll start investigating Greg's activities. It's going to be a tough battle, but you're not alone in this." Days turned into weeks as Lila and Eleanor worked tirelessly to uncover the truth. The investigation revealed a web of deceit and corruption that went far beyond what Lila had imagined. Greg had been involved in shady business deals, money laundering, and even bribery. His parents were complicit, using their influence to protect him and further their own interests. Lila's resolve hardened with each new revelation. She realized that her fight was not just for herself, but for justice. The man she had once loved had become a threat to her and others, and she could not allow him to continue his reign of manipulation and deceit. One evening, as she reviewed the latest findings in her apartment, her phone buzzed with a message from Eleanor. It was a link to a news article about a recent scandal involving one of Greg's business associates. The associate had been arrested on charges of fraud and was cooperating with authorities, providing information that could implicate Greg. Lila's heart raced as she read the article. This was the break they needed. She immediately called Eleanor. "Did you see the news?" she asked, her voice filled with a mix of excitement and apprehension. "Yes," Eleanor replied. "This could be the leverage we need. If Greg's associate is willing to testify, we can use that to pressure Greg and his parents. They're in deeper trouble than they realize." The following week, Lila met with Detective Jameson, who had been working closely with Eleanor on the case. The detective was a seasoned investigator with a reputation for tenacity and integrity. He had taken a personal interest in Lila's situation, recognizing the broader implications of Greg's actions. As they sat in Jameson's office, the detective laid out their plan. "We have enough evidence to bring charges against Greg and his parents," he said, his voice steady and reassuring. "But we need to act carefully. They're likely to retaliate once they realize we're closing in." Lila nodded, her determination unwavering. "What do you need me to do?" Jameson leaned forward, his eyes filled with resolve. "We need you to continue gathering information. Any conversations, documents, anything that can strengthen our case. And we'll need you to testify when the time comes." Lila took a deep breath, the weight of the situation settling over her. "I'm ready. Whatever it takes." The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Lila continued her work, both in her business and in gathering evidence against Greg. The tension was palpable, but so was the sense of purpose. She was no longer a victim. She was a warrior, fighting for her future and for justice. One evening, as she reviewed the latest documents in her apartment, she received a call from Eleanor. "We have a development," Eleanor said, her voice tinged with urgency. "Greg's associate has agreed to testify. He's provided detailed information about their dealings, and it's enough to bring down their entire operation." Lila's heart pounded with excitement and relief. "What's our next move?" Eleanor's voice was firm and determined. "We move forward with the charges. It's time to bring them down." The courtroom was filled with tension as the trial began. Lila sat beside Eleanor, her heart racing as the proceedings unfolded. Greg and his parents were present, their expressions a mix of anger and fear. The evidence was damning, and the testimony from Greg's associate painted a clear picture of their guilt. Lila took the stand, her hands trembling slightly as she recounted her experiences. She spoke with clarity and conviction, her voice steady as she described the betrayal and the lengths she had gone to uncover the truth. As she looked at Greg, she saw the facade of arrogance crumble, replaced by desperation. The jury deliberated for hours, but when they returned, the verdict was clear: guilty on all counts. Greg and his parents were led away in handcuffs, their reign of deceit finally at an end. Lila stood outside the courthouse, the weight of the past months lifting from her shoulders. Eleanor and Detective Jameson stood beside her, their expressions filled with pride and relief. "You did it, Lila," Eleanor said, her voice warm and encouraging. "You stood up for yourself and for justice." Lila smiled, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. "I couldn't have done it without you." Jameson nodded, his eyes reflecting his respect for her courage. "You're stronger than you know. Now it's time to rebuild your life." Lila looked towards the future, a future she'd have fought hard to secure. She knew there would be challenges ahead, but she was ready to face them, armed with the strength and resilience she had discovered within herself. Lila stood in her small, cozy apartment, the walls now covered with court documents and photographs from her former home. Each piece of paper represented a step in her plan to reclaim what was rightfully hers. The apartment, though a far cry from the house she had lovingly built, had become a war room, a place where she strategized and prepared for the battle ahead. Her lawyer, Jonathan Harris, was a trusted ally. With his sharp intellect and unyielding determination, he had taken on Lila's case with fervor. Together, they crafted a meticulous plan to gather irrefutable evidence of Greg's betrayal and his parents' collusion. Lila began by sifting through hours of surveillance footage, documenting every detail of their discussions and actions. Meanwhile, Greg and his parents continued their preparations, blissfully unaware of Lila's maneuvers. They moved into the house, arrogantly discarding Lila's belongings and replacing them with their own. The house, once a symbol of love and togetherness, now stood as a monument to their greed and deception. One afternoon, as Lila reviewed the latest footage, her phone rang. It was Jonathan. "We have enough evidence," he said, his voice filled with a mix of determination and anticipation. We can proceed with the legal action. Leela felt a surge of empowerment. For the first time in months, she felt in control. "What's our first move?" she asked, her voice steady and resolved. "We'll start by filing for a restraining order against Greg and his parents," Jonathan replied. "This will bar them from making any changes to the house or its ownership. It's a strong first step." Leela nodded, a sense of purpose fueling her actions. "Let's do it." The process of filing the restraining order was grueling. Leela and Jonathan spent hours in meetings, preparing documents, and presenting their case to the court. The legal jargon and procedural complexities were overwhelming, but Leela was relentless. Her resolve was fueled by the memories of betrayal and the desire for justice. The day of the court hearing arrived, and Leela stood in the courtroom, her heart pounding with a mix of anxiety and determination. Greg and his parents sat across from her, their expressions smug and confident. They believed they had already won, that Leela's efforts were futile. As the hearing began, Jonathan presented the evidence they had painstakingly gathered. Surveillance footage, financial records, and personal testimonies painted a clear picture of Greg's deceit and his parents' complicity. The judge listened intently, his expression stern and thoughtful. Leela took the stand, her hands trembling slightly as she recounted the months of manipulation and deceit. "I loved Greg," she said, her voice steady despite the emotional weight of her words. "I trusted him, but he betrayed me in the worst possible way. This isn't just about a house. It's about justice." Greg's lawyer attempted to discredit Leela's claims, but the evidence was compelling and irrefutable. The judge's gaze shifted from the documents to Greg and his parents, his expression hardening with each new piece of evidence. After hours of deliberation, the judge delivered his verdict. "Based on the evidence presented, I find in favor of the plaintiff, Leela Thompson. The restraining order is granted, and further legal actions will proceed to address the fraudulent transfer of property." Greg and his parents were visibly shocked, their confidence shattered. Leela felt a wave of relief wash over her, but she knew the battle was far from over. This was just the beginning. Outside the courtroom, Leela and Jonathan stood together, the weight of the verdict settling in. "We did it," Jonathan said, a rare smile crossing his usually serious face. "This is a huge step forward." Leela nodded, her resolve unwavering. "Thank you, Jonathan. I couldn't have done this without you." The weeks that followed were filled with intense preparation for the upcoming trial. Leela continued to gather evidence, working closely with Jonathan to build an airtight case. The legal battle was grueling, but Leela's determination never wavered. One evening, as she sat in her apartment reviewing documents, her phone buzzed with a message from Jonathan. It was a link to a news article about a recent scandal involving one of Greg's business associates. The associate had been arrested on charges of fraud and was cooperating with authorities, providing information that could implicate Greg. Leela's heart raced as she read the article. This was the break they needed. She immediately called Jonathan. "Did you see the news?" she asked, her voice filled with a mix of excitement and apprehension. "Yes," Jonathan replied. "This could be the leverage we need. If Greg's associate is willing to testify, we can use that to pressure Greg and his parents. They're in deeper trouble than they realize." The trial began with a sense of urgency and tension. The courtroom was filled with an air of anticipation, the stakes higher than ever. Greg and his parents sat at the defense table, their expressions a mix of fear and defiance. Jonathan presented their case with precision and clarity, each piece of evidence meticulously laid out. The testimony from Greg's business associate was a critical turning point, providing direct evidence of Greg's fraudulent activities and his parents' involvement. Leela took the stand once more, her testimony powerful and unwavering. She spoke of the betrayal, the manipulation, and the emotional toll it had taken on her. Her words resonated with the jury, painting a vivid picture of her struggle for justice. After days of intense deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. We find the defendants guilty on all counts, the foreman announced, the weight of the words hanging in the air. Greg and his parents were led away in handcuffs, that reign of deceit finally at an end. Leela felt a sense of closure, a peace she hadn't known in months. Justice had been served. Outside the courthouse, Leela stood with Jonathan, the sun setting in the distance. The battle was over, but the journey of healing and rebuilding lay ahead. "You did it, Leela," Jonathan said, his voice filled with pride. "You stood up for yourself and for justice." Leela smiled, her heart light with hope. "We did it together. Thank you, Jonathan, for everything." As they walked away from the courthouse, Leela looked towards the future, a future she'd have fought hard to secure. She knew there would be challenges ahead, but she was ready to face them, armed with the strength and resilience she had discovered within herself. Weeks turned into months, but Leela's determination never wavered. Each day was a battle, filled with grueling court proceedings and sleepless nights. The weight of the legal fight bore heavily on her, but she knew she had to see it through. This was her life, her future, and she refused to let Greg and his parents strip it away. The courtroom had become a familiar place to her, with its austere wooden benches and the imposing presence of the judge's bench. It was here that she faced Greg and his parents, their expressions a mix of arrogance and disdain. Leela's lawyer, Jonathan, stood by her side, his calm and composed demeanor a source of strength. Finally, the day arrived when the judge was to deliver his verdict. The air was thick with tension, each second stretching into eternity. Leela sat, hands clasped tightly in her lap, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and fear. "The court finds in favor of the plaintiff," the judge declared, his voice echoing through the silent room. "The transfer of ownership is deemed invalid, and the house shall be returned to Leela." A wave of relief washed over Leela. She had won. The months of turmoil and uncertainty had culminated in this moment of vindication. She glanced at Greg, whose face twisted with rage and frustration. His parents looked equally dismayed, their plans crumbling before their eyes. Jonathan turned to Leela, a rare smile breaking through his typically serious expression. "Congratulations, Leela. You did it." Leela stood tall, her heart filled with a newfound strength. "We did it, Jonathan. Thank you for everything." Reclaiming her house was a bittersweet victory. The once warm and welcoming home now felt tainted with memories of betrayal and deceit. As Leela walked through the familiar rooms, she was struck by the contrast between the past and the present. The house was empty, stripped of the warmth and love it had once held. Determined to create a new sanctuary free from the shadows of the past, Leela set about rebuilding. She threw herself into the task with a vigor she hadn't felt in years. Each room was carefully redecorated, the walls painted in bright, uplifting colors. She filled the space with new furniture, each piece chosen for its comfort and beauty. The kitchen, once a battleground of silent conflicts and unspoken resentments, became a place of creativity and joy. Leela installed new countertops and cabinets, the scent of fresh wood mingling with the aroma of herbs and spices. She spent hours cooking, experimenting with recipes, and rediscovering her love for the culinary arts. One evening, as Leela was arranging a bouquet of fresh flowers in the living room, there was a knock at the door. She opened it to find her neighbor, Mrs. Collins, standing on the porch with a warm smile. "Leela, I heard the good news," Mrs. Collins said, her eyes twinkling with genuine happiness. "I'm so glad you got your house back." "Thank you, Mrs. Collins," Leela replied, feeling a rush of gratitude. "It's been a long fight, but it's worth it." Mrs. Collins nodded, her expression turning serious. "If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to ask. We're all here for you." Leela felt a lump in her throat. The support of her neighbors had been a lifeline during the darkest times. "I appreciate that truly." Despite the victory, the emotional scars remained. Leela knew that healing would take time, and she was prepared for the journey. She continued her work, finding solace in the creative process and the camaraderie of her students. Each handmade accessory she crafted was a symbol of resilience, a reminder of her strength. One day, as she was teaching a class on jewelry making, a young woman named Emily approached her. Emily had been one of her most dedicated students, always eager to learn and improve. "Leela," Emily said, her voice tinged with nervousness, "I just wanted to thank you. You've been such an inspiration to me. Watching you fight and rebuild has given me the courage to pursue my own dreams." Leela was touched by Emily's words. "Thank you, Emily. That means a lot to me. Remember, you're stronger than you think, and you can achieve anything you set your mind to." Months passed, and the house began to feel like a home again. Leela hosted gatherings with friends and neighbors, filling the rooms with laughter and joy. The once dark and oppressive atmosphere was replaced with light and warmth. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink, Leela stood on the porch, looking out at the garden she had painstakingly revived. The flowers were in full bloom, a riot of colors and fragrances. She felt a deep sense of peace and contentment. Jonathan visited that evening, bringing with him a bottle of champagne to celebrate their hard-won victory. They sat on the porch, toasting to new beginnings and brighter days. "To resilience and new beginnings," Jonathan said, raising his glass. Leela smiled, her heart full. To resilience and new beginnings. The journey had been long and arduous, but Leela had emerged stronger and wiser. She had faced betrayal and deceit, but she had also discovered her own strength and the support of those around her. As she looked towards the future, she knew that she was ready to face whatever came her way. Her house, once a symbol of loss and pain, had become a beacon of hope and renewal. And as she stood there, surrounded by the beauty she had created, Leela knew that she had truly won. The victory was not just in reclaiming her home, but in reclaiming her life and her sense of self. With a heart full of hope and determination, Leela embraced the future, ready to build a new chapter filled with love, joy, and endless possibilities. Leela moved back into her house with a sense of triumph that was both sweet and surreal. The walls that had once echoed with betrayal now held the promise of a fresh start. She walked through each room, her footsteps a soft reminder of the journey she had taken to get here. With the help of her friends and students, Leela set about redecorating. She infused the space with vibrant colors and personal touches that reflected her newfound freedom. Each brushstroke of paint, each carefully chosen piece of furniture, was a declaration of her reclaimed autonomy. The living room was transformed with a palette of warm yellows and soothing blues, the kitchen with lively greens and whites. Her bedroom, once a place of restless nights, became a sanctuary of calm and comfort. Every corner of the house spoke of renewal and hope. One evening, as she sat in her newly decorated living room, the soft glow of a lamp casting a warm light over the room, Leela reflected on her journey. She had faced betrayal and heartbreak, but had emerged stronger and more resilient. She had discovered a strength within herself she never knew existed. The sun was setting, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink. Leela watched from her window, a cup of tea cradled in her hands. The tranquil scene outside was a stark contrast to the turmoil she had endured. It was in these quiet moments that she felt the depth of her transformation. Her reverie was interrupted by a knock at the door. Leela set her tea down and walked over to open it, finding Emily, one of her most dedicated students, standing on the porch with a shy smile. "Hi, Leela. I hope I'm not disturbing you," Emily said, her voice tinged with nervousness. "Not at all, Emily. Come in," Leela replied warmly, stepping aside to let her in. Emily entered, looking around at the newly decorated space. "Wow, it looks amazing in here. You've really transformed it." "Thank you. It's been a lot of work, but it feels right," Leela said, gesturing for Emily to sit. "Would you like some tea?" "I'd love some, thank you," Emily responded, settling into a chair. Leela poured a cup of tea and handed it to Emily. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the warmth of the tea seeping into their hands. "Leela, I wanted to talk to you about something," Emily began, her eyes downcast. I have been thinking about your journey, and it's inspired me. I want to pursue my dream of starting my own jewelry line, but I'm scared. I don't know where to start. Lila smiled, recognizing the mixture of excitement and fear in Emily's eyes. Emily, you have so much talent. The first step is always the hardest, but you've already taken it by deciding to pursue your dream. The rest will follow. Emily looked up, her eyes shining with determination. Thank you, Lila. Your strength has shown me that I can be brave too. Lila continued teaching, finding joy in the simple act of creating and sharing her passion. Her classes became more than just lessons in crafting. They were sessions of empowerment and support. Each student brought their own story, and together they created a tapestry of resilience and hope. One afternoon, as she was setting up for a class, Mrs. Collins walked in with a box of pastries. I thought these might brighten up your day, she said, placing the box on the table. Thank you, Mrs. Collins. You're always so thoughtful. Lila replied, opening the box to reveal an assortment of delicious treats. Mrs. Collins smiled, her eyes twinkling. You've brought so much light into this community, Lila. It's the least we can do. Lila felt a lump in her throat. The support of her friends and neighbors had been a lifeline during her darkest times. I'm grateful for all of you. I wouldn't be here without your support. As the weeks turned into months, Lila's life settled into a new rhythm. She continued to rebuild, not just her home, but her spirit. The house that had once been a battleground was now a place of peace and creativity. Each day brought new challenges, but also new opportunities for growth and joy. One evening, as she looked out at the sunset, she knew that her story was just beginning. The journey had been long and arduous, but it had led her to a place of strength and self-discovery. Lila had reclaimed her life, and with it, the promise of new beginnings and endless possibilities. She stood on the porch, feeling the cool evening breeze on her face, and breathed deeply. The future was hers to shape, and she was ready to embrace it with open arms. One day, Jonathan visited with a proposal. Lila, I have an idea, he said as they sat on the porch, sipping lemonade. Tell me, Lila replied, intrigued by the sparkle in his eyes. I've been thinking about how your story could inspire others. What if we held a community event here, in your garden? A gathering where people can share their stories, their struggles, and their triumphs. It could be a way to bring everyone together, to heal and to celebrate resilience. Lila's heart warmed at the idea. Jonathan, that's a wonderful idea. Let's do it. The event was planned for the first weekend of summer. Lila's garden, now a riot of colors and fragrances, was the perfect setting. Word spread quickly, and soon friends, neighbors, and even strangers who heard of Lila's journey expressed their interest in attending. On the day of the event, the garden was filled with people. There were tables laden with food, a small stage for speakers, and a sense of community that was palpable. Lila stood at the center, her heart swelling with gratitude and pride. As the evening progressed, people took turns sharing their stories. There were tales of loss and recovery, of dreams pursued and achieved, of strength found in the most unexpected places. Each story was a testament to the human spirit's resilience. When it was Lila's turn to speak, she stood before the crowd, her voice steady and filled with emotion. I want to thank each and every one of you for being here today. This house, this garden, this community, it all means so much to me. My journey has been long and difficult, but it has led me to this moment, and for that I am profoundly grateful. The crowd erupted in applause, and Lila felt a sense of closure and fulfillment. The event was a celebration of resilience, a reminder that no matter the challenges faced, there is always hope and the promise of a new beginning. As the sun set and the stars began to twinkle in the sky, Lila knew that her story was just beginning. The future was bright, filled with endless possibilities, and she was ready to embrace it all with an open heart.